reported that he will send Russian Foreign Minister Kozyrev on a mediation mission to Karabakh. Russia will resolve this issue in accordance working together with the United Nations and other organizations. The 366th Motor Rifle Regiment has left Stepanakert Khankendi, but it was not able to take up its new positions in Georgia, according to Itar TASS, because the routes were blocked by the Armenian population and armed units. Local residents fear revenge from Azerbaijan after the withdrawal of the army. The commander of one of these battalions, Siran Aganyan, seized a tank and 3 automobiles to prevent the withdrawal of the regiment. Today, journalists saw evidence that the 366th Regiment participated in the Karabakh War on the side of Armenia, including fighting in the city of Khojaly. Khojaly is surrounded by Armenian settlements. The closest city within our Azerbaijani population is Agdam. As was reported at a press conference today, the city has been blockaded since February 23rd, and on February 26th was seized in an attack. The number of casualties is not known, but from those who have managed to escape, report a tragic fate for the population. Women and children and the elderly, people seen in this 30-minute videotape, made it to within 3 kilometers of the border of Agdan. It's a terrible picture. Azerbaijani traditions prohibit photographing the dead, but this videotape was an exception. They are showing it not for help, but for sympathy, they said today. Azerbaijani President Mutalibov plans to accept mediators from any CIS country who are serious mediators. At a press conference, the press and television were accused of occupying a pro-Armenian position. We should tell you that the Armenian side makes analogous accusations. We would prefer not to have to report at all on a war in Karabakh, but it exists, and our job is to inform you about it. As people, our position is to strive for peace. Yesterday, at about 6 p.m. in one region of Azerbaijan, a Mi-26 military transport helicopter was shot down as it carried local residents from Shumanyovsky region of Karabakh to Armenia. This catastrophe, as you can see by the map, occurred far from the battle zone. The Armenian helicopter was shot down by Azerbaijani forces and crashed high in the mountains. Many victims were brought to hospitals last night. It was a military helicopter bringing food into Karabakh so people don't starve to death, and on the return trip it was shot down. For the first time, the helicopter was attacked from the air by a Mi-8 aircraft without identification markings. The more powerful Mi-26 avoided the other aircraft, but was hit by rocket fire launched from the ground. The burning helicopter, from a height about 10 meters, crashed into the mountains. Because of this action by the crew, many people suffered severe injuries, but many survived. Preliminary evidence says that 13 people died. There was a fire at the Balakov nuclear power plant today. The shadow of Chernobyl teaches us to fear these events. Our correspondent assures us from the scene that the radiation levels are normal. So far, we have reports only from official sources. The administration of the power plant says that at 1:07 a.m. last night, there was at the third reactor of the plant, electrical equipment caught fire right next to the reactor. The fire was put out 35 minutes after the firefighters arrived. The reactor has been shut down and placed in critical regime. At the same time, safety is being ensured. The radiation levels are unchanged in the area. According to the international scale of such events, this is a zero-level event. The reactor will be restarted soon. The event presents no danger to the population. Journalists found out about the accident earlier than bureaucrats. Today, the Atomic Oversight Agency knew nothing about it. The evidence was this interview with the first deputy chairman of the State Atomic Oversight Agency, Gutsalov. How do you evaluate the level of safety at the nuclear stations in Russia? Despite the fact that there are atomic plants of different generations, we are taking a comprehensive series of measures to ensure their reliability and safety, and the level of safety is under our control, and we can say that it is satisfactory. Political topics are more frequently pushed into the background by economic news in the news these days. Therefore, the unfreezing of prices on milk and bread created no particular reaction. But politicians will still be able to buy bread. They don't worry about the prices. But the politicians have broken their word. They promised that in the near future, bread will not be released, the prices for bread. But now in March, they will be freed. We accelerated this process because there is a spontaneous process of liberalization of bread prices. Are you removing the last hope of the underprivileged layer of the population? In the first place, we're preserving the subsidies on bread, and we're undertaking compensation measures. As you know, we have moved up the timetable for beginning payments on frozen accounts. And if a person has no savings, we have made a decision for February, a retroactive decision to pay 200 rubles additional to pensioners. I believe we will find the resources to raise the minimum pension to 550 rubles. Compensation and partial subsidies, unfortunately, cannot change the weather. Today in the Moscow City Council, during the discussion of social protection measures, we heard these figures. Of the 9 million population of Moscow, 6.5 million have an income lower than the minimum required to live normally. The Russian government has no money, and the deputies are planning to ask the European community to help make these additional payments as humanitarian assistance. Boris Yeltsin at the last government session said, "We have bread, we have milk, no one will die." But if a person has no money, a loaf of white bread will now cost 7 to 8 rubles. The Vorkuta miners have asked President Yeltsin for the right to carry firearms. The miners also asked the Russian president personally to control the acts of terrorism against local activists. Tataria plans to open in the United States a trade and economic center in the state of Florida. Vice President of Tataria, Vasily Likhachov, agreed about this in America. The Moldovan Department of Privatization plans to introduce shares in the national wealth in May. We're talking about giving each citizen a share in the national wealth. By transforming citizens into owners, the government hopes to ensure stability in the republic and soothe the fears of the population about privatization of the economy, which were encouraged by several generations of Soviet power. We remember the appeal to give economic initiative back to the local level was publicly made by Leonid Brezhnev himself. In the 80s, 127,000 entrepreneurs tried to implement this, but the criminal code did not change over 30 years, so this activity was very dangerous. Therefore, the famous Society for Defending Convicted Entrepreneurs has become active. Its president is Mark Sherman, who served 11 years in prison. In Magnitogorsk, he was involved in illegal exchange activities. He was a middleman, as a result of which both sides remained satisfied. Collective farms built their facilities, and the factory received its share of the profits. But as a middleman, he was convicted of theft of state property. The organization now has the idea of creating strong social forces. All businessmen know that this is not safe activity. Only businessmen can bring the country and the people onto the path of prosperity and give them the things they need and feed them. The government cannot do this. The Belarusian opposition is demanding the change in government, the resignation of the president and the Supreme Soviet. The Belarusian Popular Front is collecting signatures for a referendum. No one in the Republic doubts that the necessary number of signatures will be collected. Stanislav Shushkevich will not add his signature to the demand for a reform. The referendum and call for the resignation of the Supreme Soviet are opposed by Shushkevich, but he realizes the time for reorganizing the parliament has come. The question, will we live in the CIS? How do you evaluate the coming meeting of heads of state in Kiev? What should we expect from it? And further, will our Belarusian delegation raise the issue of punitive sanctions for delivering for deliveries in excess of the agreements by several times? The question of punitive sanctions is a question for the heads of state. It's an economic question which should be decided by professionals. So I do not want to open up this question. There should be a mechanism. By the way, it seems to me that this situation is improving. A legal mechanism is being worked out. But there's a Russian president's decree and a decree by us to create an obligation to provide goods in accordance with agreements. But of course, to limit the meeting to these issues is impossible. I believe that the meeting will be difficult. If we have enough intellect and tact, we will be able to work out a specific document in the spirit of the document which was signed on February 14th. What do you think about a unified information space in the CIS? In particular, will Belarus finance Ostankino TV company's Channel 1? I think that either Channel 1 should be turned into